So good morning. For anyone who don't know me yet, now that we have the audio working, my name is Jessica MacArthur, and I have been a health and safety advisor with Workplace NL for over 4 years now. Most of my health and safety career was spent in the oil and gas construction industry, but prior to that, I worked in a quality role in nuclear power. So for all the Simpsons fans that are listening in this morning, I'm essentially the female version of Homer Simpson. But today, I'm super excited to be here to chat with you all about a new tool that we'll be rolling out. But first of all, who are we? Workplace NL serves approximately 13,000 injured workers and more than 17,500 employers. We are an employer-funded, no-fault insurance system that promotes safe and healthy workplaces, provides return-to-work programs, and offers fair compensation to injured workers and their dependents. Prevention Services is the department that I work for, and we are made up of a group of health and safety professionals that focus on promoting occupational health and safety education and awareness with employers and employees in our province. Some of the services we provide include working with employers with high claims costs to ensure we help them reduce their injuries at their workplaces. We provide statistics on employer performance and other measures of safety. We help them develop health and safety resources, publications within our organization, workshops and webinars like this one, and we do them for workplaces as well. Developing training standards, approving training programs for certification, and certifying persons who meet those standards is another area of our business. Assisting OHS committees, worker representatives and designates to increase the effectiveness of their duties, and providing direction to employers for the prevention of occupational disease and musculoskeletal injuries. So we have a lot of resources here at Workplace NL where we're able to assist workplaces with helping improve their health and safety management systems. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items that need to be reviewed. First and foremost, the local radio station this morning informed me that there will be a test of the emergency alert system at 10:55 a.m. in Newfoundland and 10:25 a.m. in most of Labrador. My advance apologies if you can hear it through the mic from here in the office, as everyone's phones will probably be having alerts going through them. But the first thing I kind of want to start out with, now that we have that out of the way, is stretching. And I'd like to tie my safety moment for today's session to stretching. So I'll throw this out there. Did you know that studies now show that people who experience long bouts of uninterrupted sitting and who stay sedentary for much of their waking time, so 12.5 hours or more a day, have the highest risk of death from any cause? But there's one thing you can do to reduce that harm. Move every 30 minutes for at least 1 minute, and that's it. So as part of today, part of our session today, we're anticipating between 60 and 90 minutes. So we will get up for a couple of stretches, and my colleague Kim will assist us with that. She'll be our clock watcher and remind us to make sure we do our stretches. So for now, please adjust your body to ensure you are in an ergonomic position to avoid discomfort while attending this webinar. I want you to be comfortable. Secondly, if you have any questions throughout the session today, please drop them into the chat box, and if time allows, I'll answer them at the end of the session. If we run a little short on time, I will certainly make sure that I answer your questions via email after the presentation is over. My information will be displayed at the end of this session. And something new for anyone who attends our webinars, this one might be a little bit new, but for today's presentation, I'll be using Slido for our polls and interactions. And I'm going to walk you through kind of quickly how we use Slido. So you have two options. You can, if you have a mobile phone handy and you want to download the app, you can certainly do so now. Just go into the App Store, type in SLIDO, and you'll see that it should pop up and it downloads really quickly. You don't need to create an account to use Slido for this session. Any information that you provide during this session will be completely anonymous, so nobody will know who answered the polls. And also, you can also go into a web browser. So if you have another screen or if you have another window open up on your computer, you can go into Chrome or you can go into Internet Explorer. Just go to slido.com, and the very first page is what you see. Says joining as a participant, no account needed, and I will give you the event code, and it'll automatically generate from there. So it should be fairly straightforward, but it is not mandatory to use this session. So if you're not sure, you're not comfortable using Slido, you certainly don't have to use it to attend today. They also have a QR code for this session. So if you want to use the QR code, you can use a QR code reader on your mobile device, or you can use a camera to scan the code. And instead of hitting the picture capture button, just hold it over and it should prompt you to open up a web browser. So there's a couple of different ways you could use Slido. So again, not mandatory. If you have any issues with it, it's not a big deal. And we'll continue on. All right, so today, during this presentation, we're going to review a few things. We're going to talk about safety culture and how it develops. Then we're going to kind of go into what is CAAT, because you saw the little dancing cat on the first screen there. I'm sure you're very intrigued and excited, as am I. Then we're going to talk about the stages of maturity under the CAAT program and some climate infographics to kind of show you what it looks like after we do a CAAT assessment. So let's get started. Safety culture. A culture consists of shared beliefs, practices, and attitudes that exist in an establishment, in a nutshell. With regards to safety culture, it is described as the shared beliefs, ideas, and values of an organization in preventing injuries and occupational disease. The safety culture of an organization is the product of individual and group values, attitudes, perceptions, competencies, and patterns of behavior that determine the commitment to and the style and proficiency of an organization's health and safety management. That's a whole lot of words there in one sentence. So we're going to go into it in a little more depth. Okay. Take a look at the photo there. So we've got someone kind of cruising along in their car on a nice sunny day. Let's assume that everyone attending this webinar today is a licensed driver. So in order for us to be able to drive, we are not legally allowed to wake up one day and just decide to take a car and start driving. You have to write a written test, possibly do a course, and then a road test. There are systems in place to make sure that everyone who is driving knows the same set of rules that we all agree to follow before getting our driver's license. And since we are granted a license, we know that when we don't follow the rules, we can be subject to warnings, fines, potentially accidents, and possibly even jail time. So, in short, there's a system that allows us to drive on public roads. We've taken all the required training and we passed our tests. And since we've all taken the same approved training and road tests in Newfoundland, everyone drives the same, right? I think we can probably all agree that that is definitely not the case for anyone who drives our roads. So let me ask you this. If they've passed their driver's tests, put some thought into what makes a poor driver. And if you like, you can drop some suggestions into the chat box there. A couple of things that kind of come to mind. Have you ever heard these sayings? I've been driving for 25 years and nothing's ever happened. It's the way I was shown 20 years ago when I started driving. I've never had an accident. I must be a good driver. Or this one here is great too. I've had the same truck for years. I know what she can do. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Maybe it's not a system issue, but it's a culture issue. If we assess the system, it may work perfectly fine. But if we don't assess the culture, we miss opportunities for improvement, just as we do when it comes to driving. In order to get a true representation of a complete health and safety ecosystem, we must assess the management systems and the culture of the organization. Now, before we get into good safety culture, positive safety culture, lots of words you can use for it, I want to kind of highlight what a poor safety culture kind of looks like. So we start with human error at the very top of the cycle there, or perceived human error, which often results in employees being disciplined, which will then result in a reduced trust between the employees and the management team, which then leads to less two-way communication. So now everyone's holding back anything that's on their mind when it comes to health and safety, but it continues on the cycle. So the suppressed weaknesses within the organization continue to persist, and then more flawed defenses and error precursors continue, contributing to the snowball effect, which will just continue on that cycle of blame. So I think you'll all agree that none of us want to be in that kind of a situation or that kind of a job site or office or work environment. This results in more and more damage to the culture of the organization. Have you seen a cycle like this in places you've worked? I certainly know I have. You know, I've been in the workforce for over 20 years now, and I've seen a lot of places like this. And the longer we let that cycle continue, the harder it is to change history. So if you look at organizations who've been around for 20, 30, 50 years, it is that much harder to change because this cycle has gone on for so long, but it can be changed. But it's also really important to recognize that culture is more easily harmed than it is restored. But like I said, it can be done. But first and foremost, we have to acknowledge what has been hurting our culture within an organization in order to make any changes. If we don't acknowledge it, if we don't find out what's going on, we won't be able to change it. So safety culture mistakes. You know, as much as us health and safety professionals like to say that we know all the answers, we definitely have our share of mistakes as well. When we try to make improvements in the health and safety world, we sometimes make mistakes. That's the bottom line. It's important to understand the potential impact of those mistakes, and hopefully we can learn from them. So the first one, buzzwords. We have so many buzzwords and we have so many acronyms. I bet we've heard so many of them over the years in your working careers. Overused buzzwords and slogans take power away from your strategy, resulting in reduced employee confidence, and it leads employees to believe that strategy lacks substance. So we have a bucket, but it doesn't hold any water. Second one there, an aggressive and strategic approach. Looking at possible solutions prematurely, such as training and new initiatives, before understanding the desired outcome of success, may lead to awkward and ineffective safety practices. We have too much focus on the failures. We tend to stress a lot on numbers, incident rates, things like that. When we set a goal, it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. All we hope is that we can do better than the last time. But creating goals simply based on avoiding failure can lead to design of goals without proper metrics to measure the successes, which can then lead to a lack of understanding of the new initiatives and goals that they aim to improve. Competing strategies. So having a belief that safety competes with productivity, quality, schedule, and cost is an outdated line of thinking. We really need to start looking at safety as part of the business. Safety strategies must align with the business strategies to create value over time in order to be successful. As long as safety is looked at as one of those additional things you have to do, the organization will not fully thrive, and none of us want that. And last but not least, ignoring culture. Focusing primarily on perceived failures such as incident prevention without considering the gap between the desired and current culture can make or break your health and safety program. Culture is the ultimate sustainability mechanism of a company. Okay, so here's our first use of Slido. So given the instructions I gave you just a couple of slides ago, the code we're going to be using today is 91501. So if you could pop that into your Slido app or under slido.com on your web browser, pop the code in 91501, and you should have a presentation question come up just as this there. What words would you use to describe a positive safety culture? I'd like to take a quick minute for you to come up with a few ideas, and if you could just drop them in, and we'll take her from there. That is fantastic. Just taking a look at all the words popping up there, and I hope you can see them on your screen. Empowerment, engagement, leadership, so critically important. Empathy, trust, excellence. I think we all strive for that. Problem solving, transparency, perfect. Proactive, independent, employee driven, fantastic. Employee driven, I absolutely love. Excellent. Good stuff. So I couldn't agree more with all of the suggestions up on the screen there. Welcoming, most certainly. Kindness. Seems like such a hard concept sometimes, and with the world changing the way it is, but so critically important when we're all working on the same team. Perfect. Okay, so thank you very much for all your answers there. That was fantastic. I'm glad some people were able to use the Slido function. I'd like to chat with some of the elements of positive safety culture. So we chatted a little bit about that blame culture. I've got some of your ideas there, which is fantastic. So now I'm going to kind of walk you through the different elements of safety culture, positive safety culture, sorry. So let's start with just culture. There's a consistent enforcement of the policies, procedures, and rules. It's mostly a fair, no blame type of environment. It will mostly stay this way as long as we don't make any changes. But if we want to move forward and help progress on our continuous improvement path, we need to start looking at more. So then we move over to reporting culture. It is a step better because now we have frontline employees reporting hazards and incidents. This allows us more control from a health and safety perspective, as some of the perceived failures now have some extra controls. And you'll notice that I say perceived failures. I don't believe there are any failures, and I think that we need to start looking at failures as opportunities. A flexible culture is the next one. This is one where we don't necessarily default to the hierarchy, we default to the expert. So maybe the hierarchy doesn't always work perfectly as we historically thought it would. A flexible culture is willing and ready to change and adapt to improve the health and safety performance of the organization. When we're finally willing to learn from our mistakes, we move into the learning culture. We accept failure and see it as an opportunity for improvement. We don't respond defensively. We commit to learning and doing better. We accept the responsibility for it, and we say, you know what, we're not going to have this happen again. We're going to do better. So that's what would be a learning culture. Now, the final one is an informed culture. This would be considered, I guess, the gold star culture because it encompasses all of the previous and more. So an informed culture can only be built on the foundations of the previous four we just reviewed. In order to achieve an informed culture, awareness and engagement from all levels of the organization is paramount. All data is collected, analyzed, and actively disseminated to all employees. Input is actively pursued as the value of such information is understood by the management team. They recognize the value in getting their employees' input. The buy-in is automatically then achieved as all employees feel the value in their contributions. These are the essentials needed for making effective decisions within any organization, and that can be used for, safety, quality, production, cost planning, all of those things. Positive safety culture is able to evolve over time, but organizations don't typically start with informed culture. It's developed through the other elements first. Trying to start with the informed culture may result in a cart before the horse kind of situation. And let's face it, we can't get to the market with the horse behind the cart. So consider where your organization falls into these elements and what you think you could do to get it where you like it to be. Okay, so we're going to use Slido again. So if you could go back into your Slido app or your web browser. If you don't have the code entered, you can enter it again, 91501. And I'd like you to select true or false on this statement. If I have a health and safety program, that means I have a good safety culture. Okay, so it looks like 96% of the people who answered this question said that it was false. We had some who said not sure. And we did have one that popped up true, which changed their mind, I think. But you know what? I think it's great that we had answers for all of them, because a common misconception for a long time was that, if I have a good safety program, I should have, a good safety culture, because we've got this great program, these policies and procedures are beautiful, there's no reason why our culture should be struggling. But over time, we kind of identified that, it's a great way to start. Having your health and safety program is a fantastic way to start. Setting your goals, establishing expectations, identifying training and inspection requirements, developing safe work procedures, and so on. But a comprehensive safety program doesn't necessarily mean that you have a positive safety culture. So let's talk about how culture develops for the next few slides here. It's important to discuss how it develops, because how can we fix it otherwise if we don't look at how it actually got to where it is? Without understanding how it develops, it'd be really hard to try to improve it. Let's imagine that this red circle is someone's mind, and we'll take a look at how culture develops within the mind, leading us to our final outcome. The first thing that impacts us is our experiences. We all grew up differently. Different towns, provinces, countries, different religions, different family life. And those different life experiences up to this point have had an impact on us and how we perceive things. So let's use an example. Let's use an example of working at heights. Let's say that my colleague and I are replacing shingles on a roof with neither of us wearing fall protection. We've worked this way 100 times before. We've been doing it since we were 18, and nothing has ever happened. So this would be positively reinforcing negative behavior, which could be my only experience that I have. Then let's assume one day my coworker falls off the roof, sustaining serious injuries. That incident would impact my experiences in a very different way. At first in this example, my previous experiences created a perception that safety was insignificant to me. Look at how quickly a change in my personal experiences switched to safety being important to me because of a catastrophic or potentially catastrophic incident. But we don't want to have catastrophic incidents just to change our mindset. We would like to be a little more proactive. So to further expand on the experiences, there are often 3 levels used as shown on this slide. Starting on the bottom, people who are at level 3 may not have had any significant experiences to impact their belief system. Just like me working at heights in the example on the last slide. I have been a roof worker for years and never seen anything happen, so it would have a very low impact on my experience and beliefs. A level 1 experience is one that has a profound impact and is typically emotionally based. A level 3 experience is something that impacts us terribly. These experiences can be felt first or secondhand, but the first-hand experiences are typically more impactful in shaping our perceptions and beliefs, such as my colleague who may have fallen off a roof in my last example. Okay. Now let's take a look at our beliefs. A belief is a conviction based on experiences and guided by personal ethics, morals, and values. Going back to an example, when we discussed experiences in the last couple of slides, I'll use the example of religion. Just because you were raised in a religious household does not mean that you will hold the same religious values. Yes, you've been raised that way, but there's also a degree of personal influence when it comes to our beliefs over time. Beliefs exist as a result of an experience, which then leads to either a self-generated belief or an externally held belief. Self-generated beliefs are influenced through reasoning, interpretation of data, opinions, stuff like that. A self-generated belief is one where I have gone through the experience and I have processed the information and I now form the belief or opinion. Externally held beliefs are those influenced by an expert, authority, a mass influence, and achieving alignment with or generating a new mindset. An example could be an article you've read or a podcast that you've listened to from a source that you trust or some research that you've done yourself. Basically, you're kind of copying or adopting their beliefs based on what you now know. A self-generated belief is much more difficult to change than an externally held beliefs. So just like the experiences we discussed, there are 3 levels of belief. So starting at the 3rd level of beliefs, it is a loosely held belief that we're not personally invested into. These types of beliefs are easily influenced. Using the working at heights example that I mentioned earlier, I may have read an article that showed some stats on roof worker fall incidents in Australia. It didn't create a high level of personal investment for me as a roof worker in Canada. Therefore, it may or may not influence my belief system. Whereas if I read an article that was about someone that worked for a company in a different location, maybe my roofing company has an office in Calgary, and then I looked at one of their incident reports. It's basically a 2nd degree exposure. I may be inclined a little more to sway my belief. And if in that same example, if the employee who experienced the fall was someone I work closely with, it certainly would have a much bigger influence on my beliefs. So we can't see people's experiences, we can't see people's beliefs. And unlike those previous two elements, we can sometimes see someone's attitude, much like in the apple comparison that just popped up there. So let's look at the different types of attitudes that people have. I'll bring us back to the example of driving. We've all known someone who doesn't wear a seatbelt for one reason or another, even though we all know it is allowed to do so here in Newfoundland. They've done the driver's test, they know the requirement, and they still choose not to wear it. That represents a complacent, nothing will happen to me attitude. We've also known the person who puts a seatbelt on quickly if they see a police car approaching them, or puts it over their shoulder to make it appear that they're following the rules. The external cue of a police car would trigger them to be compliant for fear of consequences. That attitude represents a compliant attitude, or in other words, I will follow your safety rules as long as someone is watching me. Once the threat of reprimand has left, the non-compliant behavior resumes. And lastly, there are the drivers who follow the rules of the road regardless of any external incentives. They make the choice to drive safely and follow the rules of the road even when no one is looking. They recognize that driving a vehicle unsafely can potentially cause harm to themselves or others, so they take the precautions to eliminate or reduce the risk of harm to them and to others. That attitude represents a committed attitude. I will do the right thing even in the moment of choice when nobody is watching, because I value health and safety. One of my kids asked me once when I was at a red light, they said, when you're at a red light, do you have to stop if there's nobody around? And I said, I most certainly do. And they said, why, if there's nobody there? I said, because it's allowed to do so. And it doesn't matter that nobody's there. The law says I have to, it's a privilege to drive, so the law says I have to stop at a red light. Simple as that. And we know that by possibly running a red light, there could be an emergency vehicle or someone driving too fast. So we know we should do it anyways. So that's why we make that conscious decision. That's a committed attitude. Okay, so I'm going to run you through a little exercise, and this can probably be part of your stretch actually, because we're kind of due for a stretch here now. So if you could all stand up for a quick moment, I'd like to run you through a little exercise. From where you are right now, please put your hands straight up in the air as high as you can. Now, obviously I can't see you, so I'm going to put my trust and faith in you that you have your arm up. Now, what I'd like you to do next is go 2 inches higher. So first put your arm up or your hand up as high as you can, but then I want you to go 2 inches higher than that. So when I asked you to raise it, you can put your arm down. When I asked you to raise it as high as you could for the first time, think of the reasons why you didn't raise it as high as you could, even though I asked you to. Because I'm betting that when I asked you to raise it higher, and even though I can't see you, I'm assuming that you were actually able to reach a little higher than you did the first time. That is what we call discretionary energy. You made a choice to give more when I asked you. In the workplace, employees choose how much energy to give their employer or supervisor, or how engaged they want to be. Our role as leaders is to tap into that discretionary energy and have engaged employees. We need those engaged employees who are willing to apply their knowledge and skills towards the organization's values and goals. Their positive enthusiasm demonstrated for their work, their team, their leader, and their clients will create a positive ripple effect for the entire organization over time, and it will set the right kind of examples for others coming in. I hope that makes sense. All right, so continuing on how culture develops. So our experience, beliefs, and attitudes are all developed and impacted by societal, personal, and organizational influences, which forms a person's behavioral norms. This can result in a person's action or lack of action when faced with a decision, such as putting on your seatbelt before operating a vehicle. The biggest difference in societal and personal influences from the organizational influences is that in some situations, not all, we have some degree of control. As health and safety leaders, supervisors, managers, directors, and CEOs, we can control our response to situations. So we do have a degree of control over those. As an example, let's go back to the driver who chooses not to wear a seatbelt. As a manager, it was reported to me that she was observed not wearing her seatbelt on a delivery. Now, I can bark at the employee and tell her that as a delivery driver, she knows she's required to wear her seatbelt or will be suspended without pay. Or I can also speak to that employee in a civil manner as a team member and someone who cares, and let her know that it's important to me as well as to the company that she wears her seatbelt for her own safety and that of others, so that she can return home to her family each day after work. So can you see the difference in how it might be responded on her side? I can bark at her and tell her that she's going to be suspended, or I can demonstrate a level of care. Which do you think that she would respond to better? Okay, so I'm going to get you to use your Slido again. We're going to talk about changing culture. So we can change a culture in 3 different ways: by influencing behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs. And I'd like to know if you could pop open your Slido responses again with 91501, which would you think will lead to sustainable change? Okay, so let's take a look at the responses. So we have a little bit of everything here, which is great. Because when we're looking at sustainable change, we certainly want to influence the attitudes. We also want to influence their behaviors. By influencing their attitudes, we can probably influence their behaviors, which will then influence their beliefs. So really, the answer is we would certainly like to influence all of them. But if we can get to their belief system, so if you use the example of myself at a red light, that's a core belief of mine. I believe that I should be stopping at a red light even when there's nobody there, because there is a potential for someone else to come in. Now, if I just changed my attitude, and I only did it when I was at work, so if I was on work time going to a meeting, and that would be the only time I wouldn't run a red light, it doesn't really roll over into my personal life. It's just my attitude when I'm at work. But if I believe in my core that that is not the right thing to do and I will not do it, that's where sustainable change actually happens. So thank you very much for your participation in that poll. I think that might be the last Slido poll for this session. So in Gallup's State of the American Workforce report in 2016, this is a really good report for reading about. You know, it is an American report, but we're not that far away. They compare companies who do not have an engaged workforce with those that have a highly engaged workforce. So I wanted to kind of put this chart here to kind of show you the stats on the differences that they saw. While it's important to note that in improved profitability, sales, and productivity, you can see that they're on the very top couple lines there. Take a look at the 70% reduction in safety incidents. Isn't that astronomical? Engaged workers are more mindful of their surroundings. They're more in tune. That whole buy-in is not even a concern because you know that you have it. They are aware of safety procedures and they're diligent about keeping their coworkers and customers protected. They care. That's the bottom line. So because of that awareness, because they're mindful when it comes to their work, when it comes to health and safety, that reduced the safety incidents in these employers. So if it's worth your time, I guess if you'd like to dig into that one a little bit more, Gallup's State of the American Workforce report that was done in 2016 is where that came from. So reactions to workplace culture. As humans, we know that change is difficult. It usually is. So there are 4 typical responses to changes within an organization. The first one, we embrace it. Everyone loves it. We welcome and embrace the change. We recognize that change is a part of life and a part of business. And to continue to grow, we need to change and adapt. Now, does everyone have that same mindset? Most likely not. The second one is challenge and change. So we initially challenge the change, but when more information is provided around the planned change, we eventually accept the change. So we know that every organization has lots of those people too. They're a little bit hesitant at first because it's human nature to resist change, but when they get more information, they see the value in it and they adapt and change. The third one there, combat and struggle, refers to the actions of some that no matter how much supporting evidence you present in support of a planned change, we do not want to accept it, so we continue to go against the grain, like this little goldfish here. It's just not swimming with the rest. And the last one is to leave. And some people choose not to embrace change in any way because they've been operating for 20 years, operating a machine the same way. They may not want to change that. So when a change happens, they just leave. They choose to leave, they choose to retire. They don't want to embrace any kind of change because what they have been doing has been working for them specifically for a very long time. It may be because of their own experiences, their own beliefs, or their own attitude, or maybe it's just a lack of information provided by the organization. Regardless, they don't want to try, so they choose to leave. It's important to recognize the people who fall into each of these categories at your workplace, as they do exist in most organizations. In order to help the business grow and reach its potential, we have to explore the behaviors of our key assets. And we all know that our key assets in any business is our people. So for example, we don't want a workforce where people leave when there are changes made to the business. So we need to look at why they are choosing that option and what can we do as a team, as a management team, to help support them instead. We don't want anyone to leave every time that there's a change, so how can we help them? John le Carre once said, "There's one thing worse than change, and that's status quo." While policies, procedures, and management systems may have worked for us at a specific point in time, it doesn't mean they will always be effective in our organizations. The business changes, the people change, the environment changes, legislation changes, society changes, health and safety changes. It would be unrealistic to expect that a health and safety program developed and implemented in 2005, as an example, would be effective in today's environment. We need to adapt to a continuous improvement way of thinking. So, I've been where you are. You may be sitting there thinking, I hear what you're saying, Jess, but where do I start? Give me something I can use here. So now it is my pleasure to introduce you to CAAT. It is not enough to do your best. You must know what to do and then do your best. As health and safety professionals, as supervisors, as managers, we sometimes think we know what we need to do to make health and safety improvements in our organizations. I mean, who knows our organization better than us? But without conducting a full assessment of our vision, goals, programs, processes, and perceptions from our employees, it will be labor in vain. How can we improve when we haven't assessed what needs to be improved? Which brings us to a brand new tool adopted by Workplace NL from Workplace Safety North in Northern Ontario. The term CAAT stands for Climate Assessment and Audit Tool, but it's more than a tool. It's an approach and methodology to achieve the greatest level of impact on health and safety outcomes. So let's dig into that a little bit more. There are two components that feed an ecosystem. One is the systems, which includes your general rules, your policies, your procedures, your expectations, your SOPs, basically all the paperwork. And the second is culture. So that's around the perception about how it is around the place of business. So you need that second element. If the systems misalign with the culture, that is where we run into problems. For example, we see this all the time in the health and safety world, where companies have detailed and complex management systems where they are dictating and stating how committed they are to safety, and here's the process we're going to do to keep them safe. Then, when you go out speaking with the employees, they don't know all those excellent policies and procedures that are written. They don't buy into it. They don't believe it. So without even looking at the complete ecosystem of the organization, we know that the culture is misaligned with the system. The CAAT approach looks at systems in parallel to the culture. This provides us with a 360-degree snapshot of the current state for the health and safety ecosystem at a point in time. When I say at a point in time, I'm going to explain that one a little bit more. So it's important to note the difference between safety culture and safety climate. They are not the same, so you may hear me using both words throughout this session. Safety culture is built and sustained over time. So when I say safety climate, and why we call CAAT climate assessment, safety climate is a snapshot of perceptions at one particular moment in time. So we can't assess the full culture of an organization just in a couple of days at your workplace. but it can give you an idea at this point in time, this is where we are. So it gives an indication of what the culture may be, if that makes sense to you. If the safety climate is consistently positive over multiple points in time, it will inevitably have an impact on safety culture because positive behaviors and attitudes will be reinforced. Similarly, if the culture is strong, the safety climate will reflect it through positive feedback received from the surveys and other measurements of safety perceptions in the CAAT. And you've probably seen these photos before. They've been kicking around a little while. As leaders, it's imperative that we try to understand the differing perspectives within our organizations. Like the image on this slide, people may see the same thing in very different ways based on their perspective or point of view. Two people can look at the exact same thing, but see it very differently. As the great philosopher Marcus Aurelius said, everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is perspective, not the truth. Health and safety programs, or what I'll call management systems, are designed to control health and safety risks. Elements like leadership, training, hazard recognition, evaluation and control, inspection, OSH committees, investigations, all of those. They are all designed to control and reduce health and safety risks. The management system should set out the expectations and standards for ongoing health and safety performance, which includes the applicable legislations. In addition to controlling hazards, a well-developed management system should ensure understanding and create motivation. Culture, on the other hand, impacts the degree of commitment to the system. We can have the most thorough and comprehensive health and safety management system in the industry, but if the organization doesn't have a strong safety culture, the system won't be nearly as effective as it has a potential to be. So CAAT allows us to look at both. For many years, the health and safety world has spent an excessive amount of time developing comprehensive programs, followed up by comprehensive forms and comprehensive checklists and more reports and more paperwork, and then we would recreate more detailed paperwork when something didn't go right or as planned. We're great at that, aren't we? Creating paperwork. A lot of people love health and safety professionals because of our paperwork. Some of the health and safety standards, programs, and procedures are exceptionally thorough, but we don't have any scientific backing to prove that they're actually impactful and helping us reach our goals. We've created so many paper-based beasts that keep us in the office pushing forms and checklists, writing more procedures, which takes us off the floor and away from the work. The excessive time it takes to complete all that paperwork really prohibits us from proactively managing and matching up the management system piece to the culture piece. So please don't feed the beast. Only give him what he needs and really spend your valuable energy where it's actually needed. Health and safety legislation, standards, and guidelines are basically just a framework that helps you build an effective health and safety management system. Your outcomes are only going to be as good and as strong as the framework itself. You're basically using this framework as a measuring stick. If the framework you are using is weak or unproven, or if the program isn't built with culture in mind, why would you expect positive results? Again, we talk about our key assets being our people. But that is why CAAT is so powerful. We know the measuring stick that we're using has been directly linked to positively impacting lagging indicators in health and safety through research, statistics, and pilot programs completed by our partners Workplace Safety North. So CAAT. What makes CAAT, or the Climate Audit and Assessment Tool, stand out? And you may be thinking to yourself, well, why would I use that one over others? So a couple of things come to mind. Compared to other assessment tools, CAAT actually allows you to identify current perceptions around how people feel, think, and behave with regard to health and safety issues and measure this against an organization's corresponding health and safety system expectations. The second one, CAAT also uses a maturity stage model that we'll discuss in detail in the next slide. The intent is to focus not on the audit scores, but the maturity stage that your organization is currently in. It also helps in guiding you on how to get to the next level up on the maturity scale. The third one, CAAT, it allows us to categorize and profile factors that contribute to workplace culture, allowing for the development and implementation of a customized, effective action plan, which would be unique to each organization. So it wouldn't be a one-size-fits-all for all employers. This will be very customized to you as an employer if you choose to use CAAT. And also with CAAT, we have the ability to reassess and measure improvements and effectiveness through future assessments. We'll go through the elements of CAAT in the upcoming slides, but another great thing about CAAT is that if an organization is challenged on a particular element, once they've been assessed, we can reassess just that element to monitor your progress. So we won't go do a full assessment over again next year. You may look at me and say, Jess, I know we did our audit last year, but can you come in and just take a look at, our leadership and commitment section and see how we've improved, because we've done certain things over the last 6 months and we'd really like to do a recheck. Then we can say, sure, we'll come in, I'll just do just the one element. So it allows us that flexibility. And this will also allow you to actively monitor your efforts and be able to relay the findings from it to your workforce. So they can see that, the efforts are working in this regard or that regard. So not only can we identify areas of discrepancy between expectation and action from a systematic standpoint, but we can also zero in on workplace health and safety culture. It's one thing to say we have a strong workplace safety culture, but this tool gives you as an organization a way to actually prove it. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the 10 key elements. So CAAT uses it's a 10 element based system, and within each element there are sub elements. So I'll highlight those for you kind of quickly. So first we have leadership, commitment, and vision, which includes the establishment of goals and objectives, measurement of performance and collaboration. Second one, hazard management and risk appreciation, would include risk assessments like general risk assessments, risk assessment scopes, control considerations. Third one is communication, which gives the framework for communication, hazard mitigation. The fourth one, responsibilities and empowerment, gives us our defined and applied roles and responsibilities, protection of rights, things like that. Down into phase 2, when we're enabling change, training and competency. So that includes our planning, delivery, and the effectiveness of training. Because not only do we outline the training, make sure we deliver the training, we want to make sure it's effective. So that's something that CAAT helps us do. And identifies competent persons. Responsiveness and support includes things like resource management. Now, do we have the resources we need? Do we have a health and safety committee? Do we have a dedicated safety person? Do we need one? We're a small organization. Maybe we only need a supervisor to kind of wear that safety hat as well. So resource management and allocation. Participation and consultation kind of goes into more on the safety committee. So planning for involvement in consultation. How does that consultation happen? Consultation in the program, issues, policies and procedures, such as your safety committees or reps or designates. Number 8, safety representative support and integration. So the communication, the purpose of whoever's in that safety role for your company, function and the strategy. What do they do? How do they conduct their work? Number 9, when we go into sustaining change. So this kind of goes more into long term. So what about continuous improvement? The priority for safety and loss mitigation includes things like investigations of your unwanted occurrences and incidents, corrective action management. How do you manage those corrective actions? And under integrated risk management, you'll see things like management of change, contractor management, procurement, things like that. So that is CAAT's elements in a nutshell. And of course, if we ever go down that road with you, we'll certainly walk you through that in a much greater detail. And we'll also be letting a publication go out, which would describe this in more detail. So you can kind of keep an eye out for that in the upcoming months. So much like other assessments, CAAT uses 4 forms of evidence to assess the safety management system. Documentation review will encompass the health and safety programs, including your policies and procedures, standards, and any other programs as required. The records review will include 3 forms of evidence. So that will be your completed forms, completed reports, completed evaluations. And observation consists of observing varying functions depending on the nature of the business, but it may include or if you can hear some alerts going off, you may be hearing them at your place of work as well. Okay, I think that everyone's getting theirs now by the sounds of it. So I'll continue on. Observation consists of observing varying functions, and depending on the nature of your work or your business, you may include toolbox meetings or management meetings, or walk through the facilities, things like that. As we now include climate assessments or perception surveys as part of the assessment, the interview requirement is significantly less. We would now typically conduct a maximum of 15 interviews, depending on the size of the organization, including 6 workers, 2 leaders, 5 supervisors, 1 committee representative, and a management representative. The rest will be done through perception surveys. So that will limit the amount of time that we have to spend tying up your people and so on. Now, I mentioned to you earlier about the stages of maturity in CAAT. In our world, we tend to focus on numbers of incidents, lost time frequency rates, things like that, assessment rates. For example, when we participate in a gap analysis or audit, our focus shifts to the percentage or the score we receive. If we get a 95%, we're content and comfortable that we're in a great place with our business, and we may never look at it again, or it could be 5 or 10 years down the road before we consider doing anything else. If we get a 50%, we tend to gravitate towards defensiveness to justify the score, instead of expending our energy into improving our health and safety management systems, which is really what we want to do. In an effort to minimize the focus on numbers and percentages, CAAT recognizes that numbers are not always reflective of the efforts put in by the organization as a whole. We recognize that. CAAT utilizes maturity stages to benchmark the current progress of the organization on a level 1 to 5 system. So I'm going to run through those kind of quickly with you too. The first level is compliant. Culture has developed naturally over time. Impact is unknown. The focus is on health and safety compliance only. So whatever the legislation says, we will do it, and that's the compliant. Corrective actions are reactive, and implementation is kind of inconsistent. The second level is passive. Culture is misaligned with desired outcomes. Health and safety is focused on addressing specific problems. Corrective actions are taken based on identified problems only. Or as we used to say in industry, we're just trying to keep the fires to a manageable level, which is often the case. So that will fall under more of a level 2, passive. Level 3 is calculative. Culture is measured and strategies are developed. Health and safety is managed through a system with designated elements. Corrective action is taken to control planned and reactive risks. So we're stepping it up a little bit more and we're strategizing. Level 4 is preemptive. Culture is reviewed, analyzed, supports, and aligns with other strategic priorities. So as I mentioned to you about including quality, cost, schedule, productivity into one big bucket, this is what we're doing here in level 4. Health and safety is part of the strategic plan and is managed in consultation with all levels. Corrective action is planned and consistently implemented. Level 5 is prosper. So that's the very top of our scale here for CAAT. Culture is purposeful, integrated into the strategic plan, and continuous improvement. Health and safety is a strategic priority, continuously improving through leading indicators. Corrective actions are systemically part of the continuous improvement process. And if you notice when I'm describing level 5, it's all about continuous improvement because they recognize the need for that. So once you get to that level, you recognize that even though you're at a level 5 now, you still need to focus on continuous improvement and have programs and systems in place to do so. Now I'd like to show you a couple of examples of what the CAAT perception surveys would look like in the report. So if you take a look at this graph, and I hope you can see it clearly, it shows the perception of workers and leadership within a sample organization. So we just did off some sample charts for the purpose of this. The leadership portion in blue indicates that things are going fairly well. When the CAAT software compiled all of the information provided in the perception surveys, most areas demonstrated approximately 8 out of 10 positive responses. So, that is pretty good. If you look at the workers' perception in yellow in the middle of the graph, notice how the perception of elements overall are not quite as favorable as we see with the leadership. Now, this is not uncommon when conducting these type of assessments. We see it quite often. The overall leadership perception often indicates that everything is going well, while the worker perception may not be quite as promising. Neither of which may be correct, let me also say. But in order to move forward, both have to be acknowledged and steps need to be taken to bridge that gap, because we would like to see a closer alignment with the leadership and the workers. In this case, let's look at the example 1 of a job function. There is a lack of senior leadership presence based on the data. This could be impacting performance and perception at the workplace. Supervisors seem to be filling the role of leadership at the site and are quite disconnected from the front line. To bridge this gap, we may consider leveraging communication, coaching, and feedback mechanisms to allow for a more cohesive team. We could allow workers to provide more insight and feedback. Leadership skill development may be needed to ensure the leader knows how to engage their workers, how to listen, and how to communicate. It doesn't always come naturally to people. This group is also quite disconnected from the middle management level. So if you take a look at the middle management there in red, these discrepancies suggest that workers may be overstepping supervisors' authority and going straight to the middle managers for direction, and that middle managers are not communicating with supervisors, creating mistrust and confusion. So as you can imagine, that would definitely create a lot of chaos within an organization. The data suggests that there may be a lack of trust from the worker's perspective when it comes to leadership levels above. A serious look at mechanisms and processes, particularly around risk management and leveled interaction, is recommended in this specific case. Soft skill developments will be beneficial in order to help the workers to engage and participate in an open environment to help identify opportunities for improvement. The training at the site seems to be hitting the mark, as you can see there in the graph. However, the data also suggests that the management system and soft skill development can use some attention. So these are some of the things that we would look at if this was an example of your organization. So we would provide some feedback on how we can kind of bridge those gaps, and that would be our main role. Actually, you know what, before we continue on this next slide, I think we're due for a little stretch break. So if you could all just stand up for a quick moment, and wherever you're comfortable, I tend to stretch out my shoulders when I'm presenting because you get a little bit tense sometimes. So I'm going to actually stretch my left arm across my chest to the right and hold that for a count of 5. And if you'd like to do that stretch with me as well, I'm going to take my right arm, stretch it across over to my left side, and hold that for a period of 5 seconds. 1. Okay, perfect. So I hope you can just stand up and shake it out a little bit, and we'll continue on. So example number 2, again under job function. So here, there is a senior management presence at the workplace, and the data suggests that this leadership level is closely aligned with the supervisor and worker levels. So if you can see there, the workers in the blue line, supervisor in yellow, middle manager in red, and this time we have senior management. These 3 levels seem to work well together in unison, don't they? For the most part, they're all fairly close. However, the data also suggests that the middle management level is disconnected from the rest of the site in some areas. So we don't often see that, so there could be some kind of a breakdown there. Overall, these data points suggest group cohesion outside of the middle management level, and with the caution that senior leadership's perception is disconnected from the reality of the workers. A self-reflection exercises regarding impact and effectiveness around the actions being taken to demonstrate leadership commitment is suggested. This will help tailor a solution that works for all. The data suggests the dedication is there, but the mechanism may be slightly missing the mark. So again, some soft skill development on the leadership level, particularly in the middle management, will be beneficial. The data also suggests that there is a close connection between supervisors and workers. This could be the result of a trusting relationship between the groups. And it can also be caused by a recent or young supervisory level that was part of the worker group, and they still hold that trust from the previous interaction. So those are some of the things that CAAT helps us dig into. And if you just take a look at this one, so this is just another example of what the CAAT report will also generate for you after we do the climate assessments. So it could be based on years of service. So we would categorize it by employees who are less than 1 year, 1 to 4 years, 5 to 14, 15 to 24, and 25 plus years. So you can kind of assess that maybe there's some lacking based on the less than 1 year. So maybe we need to do a little bit more with our indoctrination or orientation programs. So again, just a quick look. So this is something that you would be generated for you as an employer if you do avail of the CAAT program. And we have a couple of examples, some climate assessment statements. So here's an example of a perception survey results generated by CAAT. We can start to link up worker and leadership high and low areas. So when we perform CAAT and see commonality in high scores, which is shown on your screen in green on the left-hand side, and the low scores in orange on the right, we can then work together to develop an action plan that can address these gaps. So if I were to put a strategy together to help improve the culture of health and safety at this specific workplace, I would focus on fixing the commonality of what's low between the worker and the leadership. In this example, there is always enough people available to get the job done safely, so we would look at that negative perception and build from there. In that case, we could potentially do a workload analysis and an injury trend analysis that would either confirm the fact that the perception is real and that we need to do something about it, or we would try to debunk that perception and demonstrate to people that this is where what all the information is saying. It allows us to show people what the current climate of the organization is instead of just going on hearsay. Because if you live in an organization that is lacking in trust, they may not believe what you say without seeing it. So this is where it can be a helpful tool for you. So this one here is an example of the overall ecosystem. So if you wanted to look at the big snapshot, not the breakdown of some of the infographics I just showed you, but it shows you an overall ecosystem within an organization. So this is what it might look like. In this case, the culture is ranking in the purple section there. The culture is ranking much higher than the health and safety management system. The CAAT report will give a detailed breakdown of both the culture and the system. And as part of the CAAT progress, employers will also receive electronic access to their completed CAAT assessment. So you would receive a specific login where you could access the report yourself. That way, if you want to use some of your graphs that were generated for your own publications within your workplace, you're able to do so. So let's take a look at the CAAT process. As a big kind of a snapshot of what the whole process should look like, initially we would look at conducting the CAAT assessment to identify any gaps in systems and culture. Organizational commitment is critically important because what will have to happen next if you want to actually use this tool to help you improve your businesses, you'd have to develop an internal task force. I'll say task force loosely. This could be a small team, small committee, whatever you would like to call it, to take a lead on CAAT. So basically, who's going to hold the reins when it comes to what we're going to do next? Because then you'll need to do strategic planning, creating the goals, identify some outcomes, some timelines, things like that. After that, you might want to do even like a little roadmap to show it doesn't have to be within a month or 2 months. We can do a 6-month, we can do a 1-year roadmap, whatever it is that you think you need to identify what your priorities are going to be. The next one is the implementation. So this one should focus on leadership to support efforts by the task force, because in order to implement, we need that level of support from the senior management team to be able to take this any further. The last one is motivating improvement. So we want to create KPIs and some visuals and things that employees can see, so they can actually see that, you know what, I see that they're trying, I see that they want to make a difference, they recognize what our challenges were, and now they're doing more to try to change it. It also allows you to measure success over time. And if you take a little look at that key on the bottom, I stressed it a lot, but leadership is literally the key for all of this. Because if we don't have leadership support, and I know we always say that leaders are the number one and they have to give us our support, but this will flop without leadership commitment. So, in summary, As employers, we need to know our existing safety culture in order to enhance it. In order to make any positive changes, we have to acknowledge the reality of where we are. CAAT assesses the health and safety management systems in parallel to the safety climate and culture to give you a 360-degree look at your organization, and that helps you prioritize your activities on your continuous improvement journey. So we're very excited to officially roll out CAAT in the new year. If you would like to be added to the queue for getting a CAAT assessment, you can email me, or you can also email safety@workplacenl.ca, and we'll be able to provide you some information that way. So next up, I'm thinking you probably have some questions. Our time is still good for now, so if you'd like to drop a few questions in the chat box, I will give you a couple of moments to do. Okay, so we do have a couple of questions there. First one there is, how can I get started with CAAT? So due to COVID right now, we are not conducting face-to-face assessments at the time, but we are exploring the virtual means. So as we get more information about that and how we're able to conduct it virtually, we will definitely relay that information. But for the time being, my email will be at the end of the presentation and there in the chat box as well. So it could be, you could just shoot me an email and I will certainly try to keep you appraised of when we make those virtual meetings happen. Another question was on the surveys. So the perception surveys, or climate assessments as we call them in CAAT, they are typically conducted by our audit team lead. So if it was myself coming in, we would set up an area, private area, where employees and leaders and management could conduct their surveys. This can be done electronically. There's also a paper version, and we can scan it in for the audit tool. And yeah, so it's basically the importance of us doing that is that we're someone external. I guess, you know, no stake in the game when it comes to the surveys and how they respond. So we also want to make sure that we let the employees know that it is strictly confidential. We don't need their name, just their years of service, some general information like that. And everything is strictly anonymous, and they can drop it into a lockbox so that we have no concerns with you know, any trust issues when it comes to them giving their honest feedback. Because without that honest feedback, we won't be able to provide much assistance. And another question. So the question is, for an employer with multiple sites, how would the information be collected? So we would have a discussion with an employer on how they would like to conduct the assessment like that. So if you have 5 different sites, we would look at the management systems should be pretty consistent. We would do observations at each facility if you would like to do a full corporate assessment, and we would do perception surveys at each location. Now, and you may choose that, you know, if you have 40 different locations, which is quite possible for some employers, you may look that you're really only challenged with one location, so we would just like to assess this one location. So we would still look at your systems, and then we would also look at the climate of that specific location. And the last question there is about it being self-directed. It is performed by us, so it would be an on-site visit. A big difference, if you've done any of our assessments before, we typically do an OSH audit or a gap analysis, which is, you know, a great tool as well. It doesn't really assess the culture as much as we would like it to, which is the major difference with this one. But it is not self-directed, so it would be us coming to the site. One of the big differences there is that we try to minimize our on-site visit as much as possible. So on the front end, before we even arrive to your facility, we will have had your programs and systems in place. We will have had them through review in advance. So we'll have all that information. And when we come to the site, it will strictly be to facilitate the perception surveys, as well as the perception surveys and the observations. And is there a presentation or information package that explains the benefits of conducting the assessment? We are actually working on some publications that we will be putting forward to the public. So as soon as those are available, we will be, I'm sure, uploading them on our website, putting them out through the social media means as well, through either the Facebook page, and we'll definitely have that out for you. And I think that's pretty much all the questions. So I'll continue on, but if you do have any more questions afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And if I don't know the answer, I'll certainly dig it out for you and try to help you out the best I can. So let me just close this. I'm popping this up here because I think it's really super, mostly. So a company called Kronos, if you haven't heard tell of them, they developed this tiny little periodic table of essential elements of a highly engaged workforce. And maybe it's the safety geek in me that makes me love this so much, but this little table, if you take a look at it, it's got some really big things in it. This is, even though it's simple. Like look at the first one there, CTP, culture trumps performance, appreciation, friendships, boomerangs. That falls under the people and relationships section. Look at work-life balance. How important is that to everyone? So they recognize that if you have a flexible workforce, you have your me time for everybody, for your workers. Generational awareness, extremely important in this day and age. We have so many different generations working together now. Time off is important. Work-life balance, or as I like to call it, life-work balance, because life is always more important than our work, even though I love my work intensely. But we don't, I guess what's the saying? We don't live to work, we work to live. So it's important that we recognize that as employers and how we can help our employees stay content and be happy to work for us, because we recognize all these things. So take a look at it, and you can certainly look it up if you like to research a little bit more onto it, but it definitely has some useful information. I have the full infographic of this as well with a breakdown of all of those. If you'd like to have a copy, I'll gladly email you that out with the presentation as well, if you'd like to have it. Last, your feedback is super important to us, and I can't stress it enough. When this webinar ends, a pop-up window will come into your web browser, and if you could just pop in some feedback for us, it helps guide us in what our future presentations and webinars are going to include. And if there's something that we can do better, we certainly want to know about it. I certainly don't claim to be perfect, but if you want to click off that presenter was super duper, I'll take that too. So, but it also helps us select our webinars too. Like, what type of topics do you want to see? What do you want to see more of? So, if you don't mind, I would appreciate you filling that out after the webinar. So we do have some upcoming webinars till the rest of the year, and I just took a quick look, and these are the ones that popped out at me. So we've got for the rest of November, we have workplace violence and harassment legislation overview, training requirements and harassment prevention. That's a really hot topic this year with the legislative changes in last January. Then we're doing an introduction to radiation hazards, which radiation hazards exist in a lot more places than the nuclear power plants that I'm familiar with. And in December, we've got strategies to prevent serious injuries. Are you wearing the right gloves? Gloves are a huge issue in a lot of places we go. Are we having the right ones? And on December 9th, the online Young Worker OHS course is a tool for your OHS orientation. And I certainly encourage you to do that with new people coming into our workplace and young people sometimes just out of school. Really important course. I actually had my children go through it as well. December 15th, we have creating a respectful workplace. Ties into, again, workplace violence and harassment. So a really important one to attend. MSI hazards in healthcare, and MSI hazards are concerning for all industries and specifically in healthcare. So this one will be centered around healthcare challenges. But if you'd like to register for any of those and to get any more information on our workshops and webinars, you can just click down on the little red circle spot where it says view all events from our website. So go to workplacenl.ca and there we go. Click here to subscribe to our newsletter. So if you want to know more about the workshops and webinars we're offering, each year you're able to subscribe once and you will always get our information directly to your email. So please feel free to click there, and we'll also send out the link about the events if you like. We do have 3 locations in the province to serve you as much as we possibly can. But when it comes to CAAT, if you'd like to have any questions answered, jessica.mcarthur@workplacenl.ca, and I will gladly answer any questions that you have. And I'm really glad that you were able to join us for our first public launch of CAAT. And just because, you know, it's called CAAT, I tried to find a fun cat video, but I wasn't sure how professional it would be. So take a look at our little dancing cat there, and feel free to reach out at any time. Thank you very much for attending.